Humans are the most important aspect to training models. Models are a reflection of humans and reflection of the inputs both of the engineers that develop them as well as all of the data that they receive. You want a model that responds to you, and the
Context.
future of like AGI and the future of these models is something that really feels personal and something that really feels like it's understanding you. Hi, I'm MK Blake. I am the VP of Delivery Services here at WeLoad Data. My remit includes operations, quality, analytics, learning development, assessments, and a variety of other functions that help support our clients in the delivery process.
Awesome. We're so happy to have you here today, MK. So today we're talking about AI quality, but not from the usual metrics and benchmarks angle. Instead, we really want to explore quality as something rooted in human understanding, which is what we specialize here at WeLoad Data. So how people think, reason, and interpret the world. So MK, your background in localization and global languages gives you a very unique lens on this. So I want to start there. When people talk about AI quality, they often jump straight to outputs, the accuracy scores, the benchmarks, the pass fail rates. But from your perspective, I think it really reframes quality as something much deeper and more systemic. So, rooted in human cognition and culture. So, let's start with the buyer's mindset. When new customers come to Reload Data, what do they usually misunderstand about what quality actually means in AI?
Yeah, I think one of the things that our buyers frequently come to us with is we want our data as quickly as possible. And that's a bit of a shift from where their thinking should be and a bit of an education opportunity for us at WeLoad Data. Um, Humans are the most important aspect to training models. Models are a reflection of humans and reflection of the inputs both of the engineers that develop them as well as all of the data that they receive. If we just ask for data as quickly as possible, we're going to miss that human element or we're going to have it underscoped to one person's opinion. So, for example, if I want to create a task where I'm training a model how to plan a wedding. If
Mm,
I'm planning a wedding and I am in the US, I might want to think about, where is, who should I invite from my family? Like, what are the venues? Like, what's the
yeah.
place setting is going to look like? If I am a user in Turkey, I might be thinking more about the religious aspects of the ceremony or areas where how do I talk to my future spouse's family about it? Like, what are the components I'm going to include? And if you take a very narrow view of data and say, I'm only going to go as fast as possible with whatever labor I can just grab off of
Right.
the street, you're not going to get those cultural idiosyncrasies or the cultural nuance that you need to really have that kind of robust amount of data and the robust responses that really reflect the user back to themselves. Um, in terms of where we sort of start, I think you mentioned something great about quality really starts at the beginning.
Yes.
And that's really true. Quality really starts with who are the people you're sourcing? Are we sourcing real humans that really understand that this is the way that models work and the way that models really reflect them as a person and that they're able to really impart that information about themselves? We do that here at Welo with a really robust talent pipeline of saying, like, let's assess you based on who you are as a person, your
Right.
skills, your cultural background, not just can you do a task? Are you a warm body? Can you give me this many hours? I want
Yeah.
to know something about you as a person. I want to know, what are your cultural preferences? What are you good at? What are you interested in? What do you want to know about? How can I kind of tap into you and bring that to our models?
Absolutely. I love that. It sounds like the misunderstanding too is very tied to, as you put, how narrowly quality is often defined. You often use the phrase teaching technology to speak human, which really stands out. How does that idea move from philosophy into how you actually design quality systems? And what does that look like?
Yeah, absolutely. If I'm an engineer designing a task, I speak one way about things. I mean, that's a bit of a
Yeah,
generalization, but if I have a certain upbringing, a certain type of school that I go to, I have a certain view on the world. I personally have my own view on the world based on my
of
own
course.
background. And in order to have technology speak effectively, the majority of users are not engineers. Like the majority of users are just a person off the street trying to plan their day. They're trying to figure out what's going to be my new exercise regime that I want to
Yeah,
do. Help me plan this menu for my family. Help me understand these travel destinations. Help me like work with my kids on a fun and exciting project. Or they're even a business customer and they say, hey, I'm a customer service company and I want to be able to speak to my customers in their language. Like
yeah,
I'm a German car manufacturer and I want to be able to speak to my German customers in a way that's appealing to them to get them to the right solutions. And technology has to speak that fluently. And that's where Wilo's background really comes into play because when you think about localization, which was a long-standing industry well
hmm
before AI data even came
right.
into existence,
Yeah,
the reason we moved from the idea of translation to localization is because people realized that you can't just one for one translate things. You can't just say, hey, like for give you an example, if you say, and I'm going to butcher this, so I apologize in advance,
all
but if
good.
you want to give someone a high five in Mexico, you might say something like alto cinco, which like literally means high five, or you might say something like chocolos, which is like another way to say it. It's a colloquial way to say, give me a
Correct.
high five. And you might come off as really bad. You might not come off as like speaking the same language as that
Yeah,
person if
like
you're just
rude almost.
directly, yeah, like as directly translating it. And so if it's the same thing with models, they need to speak in a way that is similar to localization. It needs to
Yeah,
speak in the language of their customers in order to be effective. And that's really what we're talking about when we say teach it to speak human, because human is not just one thing. Human is a collection of all of the different
many
and
things.
wonderful
Yeah.
and variety things that people are and do.
Amazing. So that really starts to shift quality away from just checklists and towards something more cognitive, more thoughtful by design. So if we follow that logic, what does it actually mean to design a quality system around cognitive engagement instead of that simple task compliance?
Yeah, absolutely. So quality starts absolutely from day one, I think, as we've mentioned, which is one,
Yeah.
are you the right person for this task? Are you the right person who is going to be able to achieve the goals? If I'm doing a trust and safety task in India, I don't want to hire a bunch of people in the Philippines, or I don't want to hire
Right.
people who are maybe Indian American. Like they might not have the same understanding as someone who is actually in India living the everyday of trust and safety. So it starts first with identifying the absolute right people, and we do that through assessments. And then once we assess that, like, they do have the right cultural understandings, we assess, are they the right fit for the type of task? Just
hmm
because you do have a cultural understanding doesn't mean that you are a great writer or you're a great labeler. Like
Right.
everybody has their strengths, and we want to make sure that we at least are getting them that head start. We say, hey, this person, they have Indian cultural understanding and they're an amazing writer. And so we're going to bring them to this project because we know they're going to be writing prompts.
hmm
Um, and so once we have them there, then there's a couple of really key elements. One is to really understand and create a quality framework that we can then put through all of our training. We had do training at the beginning of our task saying,
hmm
here's how the task works. Here's our expectation of what you're going to do, both tactically. Here's how you use a tool. Here's how you actually write it.
Right.
Here's how you're actually going to do it. Remove those barriers of entry for them. And then also create the framework of beyond how fast they're going to move through the task, beyond how fast they're going to work with the tool. Here are the pitfalls. Here's the mental model that you need in order to be successful on this task. Um, I always think of the quality frameworks as essentially a very big analogy that we create. And we say, hey, this is one of my favorite examples. And this is an old example, and we've moved well beyond this, but if you have the query dog, and you're looking at search results and you say, if someone asks for dog, very simple query, what are they looking for? Are they looking for a picture of a photorealistic dog? Are they looking
A
for a stuffed
leash.
animal? Yeah, are they looking for a
Yeah.
leash? Are they looking for a hot dog? I mean, that's probably
Yeah,
not likely, but
true.
it's an outside
It's
case.
an
So
option.
potentially they might want a hot dog. Are they looking for a cartoon animated dog? Is there something relevant that's happened that's newsy or timely that we want to include in those results? And we need to help them create what are the boundaries of that, because the engineer or the client does have something in their mind of what they want that task to look
Totally.
like, because not all of those examples that I mentioned would want to be included in the sphere of things they'd want to include in their mental model. So making sure we have amazing examples, both positive and negative, and those negative ones are just as important as those positive
100%.
ones, so that they can create that image in their mind of, yes, this is how I want to take my own subjectiveness,
Right.
my own abilities, and apply them to this task.
Perfect. So you've touched on this a lot, that cognition, it doesn't exist in a vacuum. It's shaped by culture. So when cultural fluency is done right, how does that show up in real quality outcomes, and where do you see the biggest impact? We really specialize in this and domain expertise, so I'm curious.
Yeah, absolutely. Where you really see this biggest impact is in projects where you're really trying to teach the model how to do something new that a real user would actually do. I think you see a lot of projects that are like coding projects where you're going to be able to figure out, like, here's the
Yeah,
unit test, here's how you test against it, and there's a right answer essentially. But when you're doing something more subjective, and I think we've talked about a few of those kinds of tasks here, such as, design me an exercise plan. You're going to need to have a sphere of understanding, like we talked about. So they need to know
right.
something about exercise. They need to be someone who's interested in the topic, but then they also need to we also want to capture all of the wonderful little nuances within that. So there
Right.
should be some amount of standard deviation of people's answers, but they should all relatively stay within that sphere that we talked about. So they might be, Rachel, you might be someone who's interested in talking about Pilates, and I might be someone who's interested in talking about weightlifting, but they're all things that
Fitness,
are within,
wellness.
yeah,
Yeah.
they're all things that are within the sphere of talking about exercise. And so when it's done right, what you end up with is a data set that is well structured, meaning we're
Robust.
not talking about like dog walking, we're not talking about whatever, we're
Right.
talking about exercise, but it's robust and deep and rich, because you want to be able to capture the cases of real people's
Hmm.
actual things that they do. And when you see a model give you, and I mean, we've all been there, like seeing a model give you an output that feels so narrow, and you're like, well,
Such a good
why?
feeling.
Why did you say that to me? It's like, I want to plan my dinner with my family. And they're like, okay, well, you're probably going to want to make this 5-course meal of like chicken parm and a salad. I'm like, Not really. I've got a 3-year-old. Like, they're not going to eat that." Like,
Right.
you want a model that responds to you. And the
Context.
future of like AGI and the future of these models is something that really feels personal and something that really feels like it's understanding you. And you only get that through getting all of those little cases that you only get by having that robust, cultural, nuanced crowd or group of workers that work on those projects.
100%. I think we've all been there where come to a point where fighting with an LLM, you're still not getting it. You're not getting it and having to move on. So that's excellent. And to dive into people and process a bit deeper, if quality is a system, then obviously the people, like we've said, are not just inputs. They're really the core infrastructure that lead to everything, quality. So let's talk about what it actually takes to build the human understanding into models, not just that, but at scale. So, starting with the people themselves, what do evaluators actually need cognitively, culturally, structurally to make high quality, consistent decisions?
A lot of this is really tactical.
Yeah.
I personally started as an annotator a really long time ago, and I remember some of the things that were most helpful to me are some of the things that are still most helpful to people now.
Hmm.
Um, when you're working on a task, a lot of the times you're presented with a guideline that's 50 to 70 pages long because you're trying to create, again, that robust mental model of
Right.
like, here are all the examples, here are all the cases. But I think all of us know, all of us have been in school, all of us have tried to
Not
do,
going through that 70-page
yeah, like I
document.
can't remember what goes on in 70 pages. I can barely remember what goes on in 1 or 2 pages. And
Yeah.
so creating the artifacts for folks of like, what are the quick reference guides? What are the easy ways to remember things? And that's done through a variety of processes that we do here at Welo. One, we create these artifacts for them of like, here is like the reference, here are the most important things that you need to know. And then we also provide them really targeted feedback on their actual ratings. Like, I think there's nothing better than targeted feedback to folks
Mhm.
of saying, hey, like, this is what we saw. This is where I think you're going. This is how I understood what you're saying. This is how I might reframe it for you.
Right.
That's really, really important. And there's a variety of ways you can do that. You can do that through having actual auditors provide that feedback. You can do it through the use of some LLM type based feedback where it's kind of analyzing across responses and giving that feedback. I personally think that the auditor, the one-to-one, having high skilled cultural auditors looking at the data is the
Yeah.
most effective way rather than using sort of an LLM type system, but it is a tool at our disposal. Um, Additionally, we just also love to do kind of trainings. Training is really, really important here. Let's say you're working on a project with this 50 or 70 page guideline and you've been working on it for months. A lot of these projects, they continue on, they
Hmm.
iterate, they change, there are
Evolve.
updates. And you kind of can get lost in the shuffle, just to be honest, as an annotator. Like you miss that one email, that one guideline update, you might get lost. And so making
Yeah.
sure you have knowledge checks, making sure you have the right pedagogy in place for readers to understand here's where the change is, here's what's different, making that really clear to them to say, now we're shifting your mental model this way so that they can say, okay, now, that cartoon dog is no longer in my sphere of influence
Right.
anymore. We're no longer labeling cartoon dogs. We're only doing photorealistic dogs. And you just have to make sure that not only do you provide the training in a variety of ways for learning, so videos, images, text, people work in really different ways, but then also
Mhm.
giving them that pedagogy of knowledge checks, quizzing, capacity building, meaning giving them practice tasks to work on with feedback opportunities right away that are low stress, low stakes, so that they can really truly learn and get into the habit. Because a lot of this type of
Yeah.
work is about building the muscle memory of just that guideline becomes second nature to you.
Yeah, it's definitely also, about investing in the trainers. I know we have a very rigorous process when it comes to vetting and sourcing. Like you said, not everyone is perfect for every task. And selection clearly matters as much as training, but really investing in our trainers and educating them with all of those materials to set them up for success. So I have to agree. You've
Yeah,
invested, oh, sorry.
Yeah, I was gonna say there's one other, other real differentiator here for us at
Yeah.
Welo is I think a lot of human data companies have quality take a backseat or it's something they just want to check a box on. They can just say,
Hmm.
hey, like MK, you didn't align your ratings with Rachel, like you're out, like get out of here. Like
What's the
we don't want to
benchmark?
do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, we don't want to do that here. We have really invested in a quality team that is a standalone team that sits parallel to our operators, to the people who are delivering the projects. And the
Right.
quality team is solely focused on how do we do quality? How do we invest in our trainers? How do we invest in our raters and trainers as people and make sure that they're successful on these projects and thinking about it both from a skills, tactical based perspective, as well as that quality framework perspective.
Absolutely. You've invested heavily in how evaluators are assessed before they ever touch a task, right? So, how do cultural and psychometric assessments that we provide change the quality of the data models ultimately learn from?
Yeah, absolutely. The one exciting thing to me about our assessments process is that assessments give us an opportunity to get the right people to the task faster. So,
Mhm.
as you work on more programs, as you take more assessments and micro assessments, we start to build a profile of what you're good at. And we use actual, anonymized sample tasks to
Right.
create micro assessments to say, hey, like, let's give you some experience before you even touch a real task in production. And that gives us this full picture. So now we say, oh, hey, like MK, like she's taken an assessment on doing a RAG task. She's taken an assessment on doing an RLHF task. She's taken prompt writing. Man, is she terrible at writing. We should probably only give her these RLHF tasks and
Right.
have her work on those. And so we build that both the skills and understanding of like, do they are a good fit? Do they have the right skills? And then your point about psychometric, that one's really important and interesting
Yeah.
as well. Just because you have a PhD in biology and you're a perfect fit for the task, like let's say you would be amazing. You would write the best prompts in the
Yeah.
universe as a PhD in biology. You might not have the right kind of mindset or the right psychometrics to sit down and do 1,000 labeling tasks. Like, and I wouldn't
100%.
expect you necessarily to, because we want to find the biologist. We want to find the Spanish speaker who is not just someone who has the skills, who can do the task, who has the cultural fluency. They also have to have the grit and the mindset to be able to do this type
Right.
of work. This type of work is not easy. This type of work is hard, and it's training some of the most exciting technology in the world. And we need to make sure that we're finding the people who have that urgency, who have the excitement to actually
Mm-hmm.
work on these tasks as well.
100%. It also can be very tedious. If I have ADHD, I'm probably not going to be great at doing 1,000 tasks in one shot. Um, so once you've selected the right people, the next challenge is how you develop them. So we have touched on this a bit already, but you have said before that evaluators need to think in the logic of AI. So what does that actually look like in training, especially for more of the complex reasoning or agentic tasks?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the things that whenever you do something, I'm going to use the example of a peanut butter and jelly sandwich. This is
Okay.
like a classic
I love
project
simple ones.
management.
It's great.
Yeah, this is a classic project management one. If I say to you, Rachel, I need a knife, you can go out and get me a knife. But if I don't tell you why I need that knife, let's say if I say, Rachel, I need a knife to build the most delicious peanut butter and jelly sandwich you've ever seen, that's going to change how you operate and the kind of knife that you go get me.
Yes.
If I say, Rachel, I need some bread, and I don't tell you why, you might bring me a French baguette. I'm not sure that that's going to build me the most delicious peanut butter and jelly
Right.
sandwich, at least for me. So you need to give people context on the why of what they're doing, not just on the task they're doing, but on the bigger picture. So one of the things
Yeah.
we try to do here is really upskill people at Welo on what is the state of AI? What is the state of AI tasks? What's the purpose? Why would you do a RAG task? Why would you do an RLHF task? Why are you doing an evaluation? Like, what's the point? What makes a model work? And when a rater understands that, they're going to do a better job
Right.
at doing the task. Because again, if I just ask you for a knife and you bring me
No
a kitchen
context.
knife, man, am I going to really struggle getting that in my nice thing of
Yeah.
peanut butter and getting that peanut butter spread on the bread. So it's really, really important to give them that context. And we offer a ton of training opportunities to these trainers and raters on what is AI, how to work with models, even down to specific models like Gemini, ChatGPT,
Right.
Claude. What's the current state of them? What do you need to know? How do they function? What's the best way to prompt them? What's the best way to use them in practice? And that really changes the outcomes for us. And we see folks who understand that why and understand those principles have way better outcomes in production of a task than you would if you had no context on what you were doing.
Yeah, understanding the why definitely makes it click a lot harder in situations. So I think that's also imperative. Obviously, you mentioned that, we share the big picture, we share the why. None of this work happens in isolation. So behind the scenes, this clearly requires tight coordination across teams. How does quality operations and workforce teams work together to maintain evaluator readiness and consistency, especially at scale?
Yeah, one of the things that is important, just like in a task, is we give continuous feedback loops to our trainers. So they get that feedback directly from the quality teams. We do the same thing internally. We have these dedicated teams of quality, dedicated teams of operations, of analytics, of learning and development, of assessments. And that can work really well only if you have those continuous feedback loops. So let's say someone is getting feedback in production on quality. We want to feed back what makes a successful candidate there to our assessments team, to our
Right.
learning and development team. We want to measure at every point and listen to see how effective our strategies were. So let's say someone comes onto the project. We want to measure how did they do in the first day of production? What does that tell us about how they were on the assessments? What does that tell us about how their training materials were? Once
Hmm.
we, let's say someone's struggling on a project and we remove them and have them go through retraining. Once they enter back into production, we want to say, hey, how did they do? Let's measure that. Let's see what was effective about our retraining and constantly improve that. And in our teams, we have those single threaded leaders of those different functions so that they can really think deeply about those
Hmm.
functions and then do that cross collaboration mainly through data and metrics in order to improve their individual areas.
Yeah, I agree. I think strength comes really from not having those silos and being in constant communication, and having those dedicated members on teams, which we have, which is amazing. If we go into why human fluency is the new competitive edge. So this human-centered approach obviously didn't emerge overnight. It's deeply connected to Wilo's roots in localization and language services, which you've described as an early form of AI quality discipline. So you've made the case that localization was the original AI quality discipline. How does that heritage that we have translate into a real structural advantage today, especially for our buyers?
I remember when I was on the buyer side and I was doing a really interesting task with a group, and we were doing some prompt writing in the early days of
Okay.
one of the models. And we had asked them to create a variety of prompts around, I believe, buying sports equipment.
Okay.
And there was across a variety of countries. And the data came back, and the prompts were okay. But one of the biggest gaps was, let's say you're in the UK and you're buying sports equipment, you would never talk about US dollars, ever. You would never talk
100%.
about US dollars.
An
And these,
obvious thing.
yeah, a very obvious little thing, which made it clear to me that the data wasn't created from a human-centered
Mm,
perspective. Because nobody thought, like, is this actually how a real human being would interact? Would someone in the UK ever talk about US dollars if buying sports equipment? Probably
right.
not. And so the original discipline of localization was, you know, I'm a company. Let's say I'm a company in the US and I want to expand to the UK. Yeah, it's still English, but
Yeah. There's
but
nuances. Yeah.
but the human, if you take a human centered approach to that design and that design, then you know that localization is critical because you're not going to communicate with your customers in the right way if you don't
Right.
localize to even the very basic things like currency.
Right.
But then also just speaking the language of the customer is going to bring them in. If I come in with a very American centered approach to
Mhm.
a English company, I'm not going to have the same effectiveness as if I come in with that
Right.
localized approach. And you need experts in the culture to actually be able to do that. Human-centered design is a long-standing discipline that I think is really truly the direction that AI is moving in because humans should be at the center of it. I know there's always that focus on
Yeah.
AI, the technology, the engineering, that exciting, the AGI, but AGI doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from humans. And AGI is an exciting discipline, but I hope, and my hope for the world at this point is that we have those cultural nuances still when we get to that point, because that's what makes
Right.
us interesting as a culture and as humans.
To be honest, you would I mean, this all sounds like a no-brainer. You would think that this is the standard, but not every vendor approaches quality this way. And quality is one of those words that's thrown around a lot. But what does it really mean, right? How is that person using it? Can you define it? So when you look across the market, where do you see other vendors consistently falling short when it comes to this human-centered quality?
Yeah. Again, like I think it goes back to trade-offs on speed and quality. And just to be like very forthcoming, there are always trade-offs on speed and
Hmm.
quality. If you're just like, I need data and I need it fast and I don't care where it comes from, there are probably some tasks that are like that. Like
Yeah,
1 + 1 is probably always going to equal 2. There's some tasks where it's
yeah,
not incredibly important, but I see that approach time and time again from other vendors for all tasks. And I think it's a miss on reading the task and also some fear about like, hey, let's interject the human approach to
right,
our clients. Let's reveal to them what we know. When a client comes to work with Welo, they're coming to us for our expertise. We're not just here
right.
to give them the fastest, cheapest data. We're here to bring the expertise, to bring them real people to work on their projects. Because if they could just do it themselves, then they could just use an LLM to do that. And I know there are some vendors out there that do use LLMs and do just
Hmm.
do a lot of labeling with that.
Absolutely.
But we've seen studies coming out now after a year or two of people doing this, that the drift on those LLMs is so much harder to control, that
Right.
the drift is so significant sometimes. And then the idea of quality is being replaced by the idea of an LLM, meaning it was done by an LLM, so it must be high quality. And I think that's a really
Great call
huge
out.
fallacy. It's a fallacy. Like we are seeing that you can see the same amount of drift in an LLM as you can in a human. And with humans, you can talk to them. You can have a conversation. You can
Yeah,
say,
work it out.
"Hey, hey, like what were you thinking?" And sometimes from that, you get really interesting insights that maybe as the client you hadn't thought about. Or maybe there's something in those error patterns, something that the humans are actually doing that might help you actually improve the training of
Right.
your model, that if you just use an LLM, you're going to completely miss because you're so concerned with getting the drift right, with getting the accuracy and saying, I want to make sure that every label is exactly the
Mhm.
same. You're going to miss out on those opportunities to take your task to the next level.
And it really can snowball and snowball quickly. And that's where, people end up in a hot spot. So all of these things can really make it challenging for buyers to evaluate partners effectively. So from a buyer's perspective, because you've been on that side, what are the signals that a vendor genuinely understands cultural nuance and human in the loop systems versus just claiming to?
Yeah, that's a great question. Um, One thing that's a huge signal to me is that if I give, when I was a buyer, if I gave a client a guideline and no feedback
Mm,
got no feedback from the vendor whatsoever about the task, no information, no parroting back of, hey, Rachel, I read this. Is this
yeah,
what you meant? If you're not doing that, you're already missing the point. You're already missing the point about humans because it's a game of telephone. The engineer gives us a guideline. We have our interpretation of it. And then the raters or the trainers have their interpretation of it. And you need to align that understanding right from the very beginning of what did you mean? And always putting that thinking in your mind when it comes to talking to clients, talking to trainers. That's
yeah.
always the question you should be asking yourself is, what do you mean?
Yeah, definitely a red flag if you don't hear anything back.
Yeah.
And obviously, these risks that we see now and challenges are only going to grow as AI systems scale and evolve. And this is happening at a rapid pace. So, looking ahead as enterprises really try to deploy more agentic and multilingual systems, what is the mindset shift around quality that they still need to make?
Yeah. One thing we still continuously hear is because we have AI, we must be able to do it cheaper. We must be able to do it
Right?
faster. I actually think the opposite is true.
Invest in it.
You got to invest in the people at this point. Yeah, there was a lot of low hanging fruit when these bigger models came out and there
Totally.
was a lot of opportunity to do things fast, do things cheap, but the problems are harder now. The
Hmm.
problems are harder to make AI truly useful, especially when you're thinking about agents, where you're trying
Right.
to replicate business systems, where you're saying, hey, MK, can you pretend to be the employee of a large telecom provider and tell me what your problems are?
Yeah.
And then I'm going to make an agent that's going to solve those problems for you. That's a hard
That's
problem.
a hard
And
problem.
that's a hard problem. Like I personally can't solve that problem, but you can go and find the right people who
Person.
have the right profiles, who have the experience to give you their perspective. Because at the
Mhm.
end of the day, those agents aren't solving business problems, they're solving people problems because
Yeah.
most businesses are people problems. And
Yeah.
that's why you want agents to help the people. So these problems are just going to continue to get harder. And we still need to talk to our clients and say, hey, I know you want it faster. I know you want it cheaper, but this problem you're giving us is way harder than it used to be. And it's going to take nuance and it's going to take understanding and it's
Yeah.
going to take a conversation.
And in the long run, it's what's best for them, right? It's short-term pain for that long-term gain. So let's ground it in real outcomes. This
Yeah.
human understanding isn't abstract, it has measurable impact on how models behave in the world. So could you share an example where applying this human understanding lens clearly changed a customer result?
Yeah, absolutely. So one of the bigger areas that we've been getting into is on audio collection, and
Mhm.
this is a really hard problem that a lot of companies are facing now,
Yeah,
which is that people are starting to interact more with these models, not just in a text-based way, but in a multimodal based way. And in a multimodal environment, the way that you speak is so varied and nuanced.
hmm,
I'm originally from the East Coast, and I think you are as
yeah,
well,
same.
Rachel. And we have a particular set of accents that
Yeah,
are,
especially
I
in
mean, some
Jersey.
exactly same for me. But sometimes I like to think, and I think everybody thinks is, oh, I have standard television accent, or like I don't have an accent. But
Right.
then when you're confronted with someone who has a completely different set of the way they speak, or they're from even a different area of the same country you're in,
Right.
they talk about things in a different way. They have a different accent. They have a different way of speaking. And as soon as you change that, as soon as you change the way that someone speaks to the model, especially with audio, it changes the way the model behaves. It changes the
Hmm.
way the model behaves. And we have seen time and time again that if we get that robust collection of accents, we were doing a really interesting project about Spanish accents.
Okay.
And we collected a variety of Spanish accents. They wanted LATAM, which meaning like Latin America, and Spain-based accents. And one of the things that we highlighted to them was we're absolutely happy to collect LATAM data for you, but you need to know that it's a rich countries of dialogues, of
Yeah, we need to
dialects.
niche down here. What exactly does that mean or
Yeah,
are you looking
someone
for?
exactly. Someone who speaks Spanish in Argentina does not speak Spanish in the same way that someone in Mexico speaks Spanish. And
Mm.
so we were able to say, hey, here's our suggestion of how you think you can get the broadest coverage of accents from these variety of different places in order to greatly improve your model. And we were able to explain to the customer that it couldn't just be one type of Spanish. It needed to be a variety of countries, a variety of genders, a variety of different environments for the sound and noise, and they were able to ultimately achieve better outcomes for that project.
Amazing. So this brings us to the future, right? So to close out, what excites you most about where human-centered AI quality is headed next?
Yeah, what excites me the most? I think, I touched on AI. I mean, I'm sorry, I touched on multimodal and I touched
Mhm.
on agents a little bit. Agents are one of the most exciting opportunities, I think, for us for human-centered design, because again, I think that people are framing the problem in the wrong way. They truly are framing it as a business problem and not framing it as a human problem. And I
Right.
think the future is the people who create a really interesting way to collect agent-based data in order to see how humans actually work. I think it's one of the most fascinating things that we have going for us right now.
Hmm.
We all think we work in the same way, and the way of work is changing so rapidly right now. I don't know about you, but I now use AI all the time
All
in
the
my work,
time. I can't go
all the
back.
time, all the time. And that interaction I have with AI is a personal relationship. It
Yeah.
really is. Like the way I interact with my models, with the models I choose to interact with, is different than the way that Rachel interacts with her models. It's the different way my employees interact with their models. And
Yeah.
how do you start capturing the different ways that humans interact with those models and then translating that into making people more efficient, better agents, better ways to help them in the enterprise environment?
100%. And I think in the years to come, we're going to start seeing a bigger gap between those who are having a human-centered approach and those who don't. But thank you so much for your time today, MK. This was so informative and we really appreciate it. So until next time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Rachel. Really appreciate it.